60 to 90% change in insulin sensitivity. That sounds ridiculously too good to be true, especially if we're looking at like one magical food or something like that. Well, what we're talking about is more a category of foods, which gives you a lot more flexibility of what to choose from. But in typical Thomas DeLauer fashion, I'm going to narrow it down based upon more research and try to cherry pick what I would find to be the perfect food in this category. So let's look at this research, and I think you'll be happy with what we find. So the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition published a paper taking a look at 80 obese individuals that were insulin resistant, divided them into 4 groups. One group had moderate amounts of protein in their diet from animal sources. Another group had moderate amounts of protein from plant sources. Another group with high protein from animal sources, and another group with high protein from plant sources. Okay, what they were looking at was their HOMA-IR. They were looking at their insulin resistance. They were looking at glucose and all these different metabolic pieces. What they found is that the high protein groups with both the animal protein and the plant protein both had extreme improvements in insulin sensitivity after 1 month. So I like this study because it takes a look at the diet as a whole. It's not saying, oh, this one particular food delays carbohydrate absorption or affects this, yada, yada. It's more about lifestyle, saying like, okay, if we put you on a higher protein diet, animal or plant-based, doesn't matter. No agenda here. No one cares right now. It made a big improvement, 60 to 90% improvement in insulin sensitivity in just a month. Okay, so what the heck? Like, why is this a thing? What is going on here? Well, first of all, protein is going to be key simply with each meal because you're going to ultimately be consuming less in the way of carbohydrates as a ratio. If you eat more protein, unless you're just increasing the amount you're eating total, you're probably going to eat less in the way of carbohydrates. But there's also a lot of evidence that demonstrates by eating protein first, you can significantly delay how the carbohydrates absorb. So eating the protein first and then the carbohydrates actually affects the glycemia, affects the glycemic response. So that could be a piece too, but we don't know what order they ate their food. Another piece that's very, very important is you're stabilizing the amount of muscle you have. If you are resistance training or you are working out and you're increasing protein, then you have more ability to recover and build muscle. And muscle acts as what's called a glucose sink. Okay, the more muscle mass that you have, you don't have to be a bodybuilder, but the more muscle you have, the larger the receptacle is for glucose. If you have little teeny puny muscles that are frail, that glucose only has this much that it can fill up. But if you have a muscle that's like this, it has this much it can fill up. It gives you a lot more slack and a lot harder. It's a lot harder to become more insulin resistant. So let's dive in more to specific types of protein so we understand this. Now, before we get into that, I put a link down below for my favorite grass-fed, grass-finished beef. Now, they don't just have beef. It's a company called ButcherBox, and they deliver the meat right to your doorstep. And I love them because as far as price is concerned, it really is what I consider to be the best bang for the buck with like really good quality grass-fed, grass-finished ribeyes, fillets, New Yorks, flank steak, whatever, you name it. But they also have poultry options. They have chicken thighs. They have delicious wings that I put in the air fryer. They've got fish options. So they've got cod, they've got salmon, they've got scallops. They've even got some really delicious, like fun things, like utilizing smoked salmon. They just really a lot of variety as they've grown. They've been a sponsor of my channel for a number of years. That link down below will get you access to them so you can check them out and again, get it delivered right to your doorstep. Nothing beats a good grass-fed, grass-finished lean filet to me. That is like perfect. So that link is down below in the description. Now, we're talking about red meat here specifically right there, but what kind of meat might be best in this protein category? Well, for me, I have to start looking at other pieces. What are potential issues with insulin resistance? 2 things we look at. Okay, we have issues with inflammation, and we have issues with sort of metabolic dysfunction, mitochondrial dysregulation dysfunction. And what that means is like the bioenergetics, how we metabolize fuel is disrupted. If the mitochondria, the energy powerhouse within our cell, is already not functioning well, it has a hard time processing glucose. Think of a factory, and this factory cannot, it's got 5 out of 10 components working. Okay, so like half the conveyor belts are shut down. Think about it. Its output is not going to be good, so you're gonna have this pileup of glucose, right? Dysfunctional mitochondria is a big piece, and then you also deal with what's called damage of the endoplasmic reticulum, which is another area that's important for bioenergetics. Now, where am I going with this? If that damage is there, we need to work on ways to potentially improve that. And one of the ways that that can be improved based upon the literature is with polyunsaturated fatty acids. Okay, these are really high quality, good fats. We're talking namely things like fish oil. So when I start looking at this and I say, okay, we have to pay attention to omega-3 intake. Now, beef is good, okay? In this case, I mean, arguably grass-fed, grass-finished beef is going to have a higher omega-3 content than grain-fed, but it's such a negligible amount, I don't think it's worth saying, hey, a grass-fed steak is going to be better than some sockeye salmon as far as omega-3s are concerned. That's not even a question. Water-based, marine-based omega-3s are going to be exponentially higher. So in this case, I look at things like cod, I look at things like sockeye salmon, and say, okay, sardines and probably sockeye salmon are probably the very top two. Super high protein, but also largely polyunsaturated fats. So we're solving this protein equation, but we're also solving the omega-3 situation, okay? Very, very interesting to look at. And when you look at the abundance of omega-6s in our diet and the correlation between high omega-6s, not just omega-6s in general, but high omega-6s and inflammation, that can be a problem too. Now, the omega-6s can play a role in this inflammatory response that we have. Of course, we have to be having them in large amounts, but unfortunately, that's what we do. We have them in large amounts. So I'm not trying to throw them under the bus. I'm just saying like, hey, the ratio of omega-3 to 6 might need to be a little better, because if that inflammatory signal is high, that acts as like a static that affects how our cells receive a signal from insulin. So you see where I'm going with this. By increasing protein intake significantly, okay, I would say probably get yourself up to at least 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. But really, I mean, if we wanted to kind of put it into imperial, I would say try to aim for 0.5 gram of protein per pound of body weight minimum. And if you're really trying to put on some muscle, I still lean towards 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. It doesn't mean you need to get it all through sockeye salmon and sardines, but I do think maybe one meal every other day coming from sockeye salmon or every 3 days would at least give you a bump in the omega-3s that could help you out with the situation. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.